Word of God today in our last service before the end of the year. And so I'm going to go ahead and pray, and then we're going to open the Word. Lord, thank you so much for this day again, and thank you for the beautiful songs we were just able to sing, and Psalm 90 that was read and then prayed over, Lord. And just really kind of exciting to think about the future, Lord, and that you are in control of it all. And I just pray that as we look at the Word today, that we would be encouraged as we face the future and how to go about doing that as Christians. So I pray you would just bless your Word now, and thank you for it in Jesus' precious name, Lord. Amen. So as many of you know, we're usually we're going through the Gospel of John, but since it was the end of the year, and I thought it might be kind of nice to just do a little bit of a veer off and deal with a particular subject on how to anticipate the new year. So I've titled my sermon today, Run to Win. Run to Win, because the Christian life is actually a race. And our text will be just 3 verses, really. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. Hebrews 12, 1 through 3. And I would like to start by reading those verses. And I'm reading out of the New American Standard Bible. Okay. That means that it was a really important text that we're going to read today. Thank you so much. Okay. I know now everyone's woken up. It's great. Okay. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you may not grow weary and lose heart. Run to win. Run to win. Some years ago, many of you know that I was the hockey chaplain here in Geneva for 16 years. And in fact, we're actually going to a hockey game on January 7th. If you're not signed up, it's not too late, though you'll have to get tickets on your own. But we got quite a group going. But anyway, I was the chaplain of the hockey team, and something happened one day at a game that was absolutely amazing. During this game, this particular player was sitting on the player's bench. That's the player zone where they're all lined up, sitting ready to just bounce onto the ice with his team. And he was waiting for his turn to get on the ice, and suddenly another player on the ice hit the puck. The puck is that round plastic hard thing that's black. He hit the puck, but without realizing it, because those things go really fast, that puck came right toward this particular player and hit him right smack in the mouth. I mean, we're talking a very fast slapstick putt, boom, in the mouth. And 7,000 spectators gasped as they saw this happen, and blood just pouring out of this guy's mouth. So instinctively, he holds his mouth. He runs out, goes back to the infirmary in the hallway there, and they had a dentist there. They always do, because if you'll notice, hockey players often have missing teeth for that very reason. And so here was the prognosis on this one guy. The center top tooth gone. The 4 front bottom teeth flat in his mouth. So, what to do? The game was critical, and this player was a critical element in the team. So I wasn't there. I was outside the game looking at the game, but he told me the story afterwards. So this is what happened. The dentist said, okay, look, we can't do anything about your top tooth because it's gone. However, we can do something about your bottom teeth. This is what we're going to do. And he got a special tool out, and he took those 4 flatted teeth and brought them back up. All 4 teeth. He pulled them back up into his mouth, straightened them out, and that player, guess what he did? went right back onto the ice and finished the game. Amazing. Well, of course, he had to have several operations over the next few weeks. He quickly regained new teeth, a new smile, and a new mouth. But what's the lesson here? What's the lesson? In fact, Walter, you're a big hockey guy too. Do you remember that story? Tu te rappelles? Yeah, that's amazing. I think the lesson here is endurance. You know, these hockey players, I noticed this all those years, they have this incredible tolerance for pain that just absolutely blows me away. And they have one goal, only one goal, to win. That's all that matters to them. And they will go beyond what we might consider normal to achieve it. They endure pain and sacrifice daily. They push themselves daily to win because that's all that matters for them. Well, that actually should be our perspective on the Christian life. Because the Christian life, as you may know, is full of pitfalls and difficulties and frustrations and turmoil, sometimes persecution, depending what country you're in. But it is worth living to the full despite its problems. And so I thought about this text as we are anticipating the new year before us, which will just start in 3 days. It will be actually, listen to this, our new year will be only as good as our attitudes decides they should be. What exactly is in store for us? We don't know. You don't know what's going to happen to you. I have no idea what's going to happen to me. As Frank was reading the Psalm, you know, the Psalm says 70 years is kind of the normal amount of years you have. I'm 68. I'm going, whoa, I may just have 2 years left. You know, I don't know. I just don't know. But that is kind of what you think about when you get older. I don't know what's in store for me. But we can decide now how we choose to live that next year despite our circumstances. Will we choose to run the race with perseverance and keep going even if, and I hope they don't, but even if things get really tough? Or will we just give up? Well, to help us think through this and to help motivate us as we begin the new year, I'd like to look at these few verses that we just read in Hebrews 12. Now, notice something right off the bat. The author of Hebrews uses a sporting image to describe a very important aspect of the Christian life, running the race with endurance. That's what he said at the end of verse 1. He says, "Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." Therefore, he pictures the Christian life as a race that we must run and win. That's the way he's picturing it here. So before we go into the details, just a bit of background about the book of Hebrews. We don't know for sure who the author is, but the context seems pretty easy to understand. The title of the book, Hebrews, tells us that the author was writing to Jews, or Hebrews, who had embraced Jesus Christ as their Messiah. And the book of Hebrews shows how the animal sacrifices in the Old Testament that the people offered for the forgiveness of their sins were images of the perfect sacrifice that would take place in God's Son, Jesus Christ. When Christ appeared and people placed their trust in him for their salvation, well, animal sacrifices ceased. They were a shadow of Christ when he came. But the problem is that embracing Jesus Christ as their Messiah brought upon these Jews enormous problems. You see, Jesus was considered a false prophet and a heretic by the religious establishment. So, if you followed Jesus, you were now labeled the same as him, heretic, with all the grave consequences that would lead for you. You would be, for example, ostracized from society. In fact, Jesus warned us in John 15:20, quote, "If they persecuted me," what? "They will persecute you." So this is just one of the deals. If you follow Jesus, if you love Jesus, sooner or later, someone will persecute you. And this is precisely what these Jewish Christians were now undergoing. Not only does the whole of chapter 11 speak of this, and we'll come back to this in just a minute, but note in chapter 12, verses 3 and 4, he says, "For consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you may not grow weary and lose heart. You have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin. And so he's saying, you know what? Jesus shed blood. You may have to shed blood too as a Christian, as you are fighting for the truth. And so such was the persecution of some of these Hebrew Christians, and some of them were growing weary. They were getting tired. It's like, suffering and trials and persecution just gets old. It gets old. And so they were discouraged in face of this opposition. So that's why the author of Hebrews in chapter 12, verses 1 through 3 says to them, no, don't let yourself somber into discouragement. No, persevere. He says the Christian life is a race, often painful, but worth the living. And when you're hurting, when the horizon seems dark and discouraging, that's the time when you need to keep running and keep going until the end. Now, what's interesting about these verses 1 and 2, there's really only one main verb. All the others are participles intended to describe the main verb. And what's the main verb? Run. Again, the sporting verb particularly well describes those who run in a competition, those who train, those who fight hard to put their strength into achieving the prize. It sort of reminds me of 1 Corinthians 9. You're probably familiar with these verses. 1 Corinthians 9:24, which says, do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may win. This is Paul speaking here. And everyone who competes in the games exercises self-control in all things. They then do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So he's saying, runners and sports people do it for a prize. We do it for an imperishable spiritual prize, which is heaven. Therefore, I run in such a way as not without aim. I box in such a way as not beating the air, but I buffet my body and make it a slave, lest possibly after I have preached to others, I myself should be disqualified. He's not saying that we're saved by doing all these things. He's saying, as a believer, I want to run that race as a believer so as to get to the end without a major pitfall. So, the aim is to encourage the reader to run the race of the Christian life. So in these verses, the author of Hebrews wants us to remember 5 critical principles to help us run the race to win and to run the race with perseverance. Now I'm going to give them all 5 to you as imperatives, okay, just to make it easier, as imperatives. So what is the first critical principle to help us run the race with perseverance? Here it is. Imitate past witnesses. Imitate past witnesses. Verse 1, let's try again. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also, and he goes on. So that's how it begins. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us. Now, I don't know about you, but there's something very motivating about reading biographies, like the story of someone's life. This Christmas, just a few days ago, I was offered a very interesting gift. I was offered the biography of Elon Musk, the wealthiest guy in the whole world today. And I thought, well, that's a really interesting gift. And so I'm in the midst of reading the biography of Elon Musk. Not that I aspire to be the second richest man in the world at all, okay? But I just thought, like, what an interesting story. This guy is from South Africa. He ends up to Canada. Then he goes to America. And I mean, the guy's still young compared to me. And he's made all this money. You're going, that's amazing. It's just an amazing story, right? And just from a pretty well-to-do family living in South Africa. But anyway, and he went through this whole trajectory. I'm only about 1/5 through the book, but man, it's not been an easy life for him. It's been up and down and up and down. And when you're that successful, you start making a ton of enemies, and he's got a lot of enemies. It's amazing, you know. He's not a Christian. He's a little weird in many, many ways, but he's super smart, and it's kind of inspiring just to read that story. Now, I love Christian biographies especially. I've read many of them. There's a little series called The Heroes of History, and, you know, all these great missionaries and pastors of the past. I mean, I think it's great as a pastor to read stories of other pastors. They're very, very inspiring. You begin to see how they lived, the choices they made, the sovereign hand of God in their lives, their ups and downs, how they managed those ups and downs, how the Lord used them in their day. When you start reading the stories of those who were martyred for their faith, killed for their faith, they grip you, they hurt you, you cry over them, but they also inspire you, and you go, wait a minute, if they kept going, I need to keep going. Especially since my life seems to be so easy compared to theirs. Well, that's the exact purpose of verse 1 in our text. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us. Now, I'm not putting Elon Musk as one of those witnesses, okay? He's not a Christian. I was just showing the illustration of the interest of reading biographies. But all those other Christians are what I would consider these witnesses. The first thing that will help us run the race with endurance is to consider those witnesses of the past. So who's he talking about here in verse 1? Well, the key is the first word. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses. Therefore. That little word forces the reader to look back in the context because it makes the link with what has just been said. Therefore, the cloud of witnesses the author mentions is actually in chapter 11. In chapter 11, these witnesses are going to be a huge motivator for us as Christians in the race. In chapter 11, 16 witnesses, 16 past believers, if you want, are mentioned by name, and others are described anonymously. These witnesses are men and women who have gone before us in a life devoted to the Lord. Their many difficulties become an inspiration to us. And here is the point of the author of Hebrews. If these men and women could persevere to the end with their difficulties, then why can't we as well? Let's look at some of them, okay? Suppose you're going through a really bad trial. I hope that doesn't happen for you, but maybe next year you might be going through a very difficult trial, and you're just out of patience. It just goes on and on and on, and you're tired of it. And you turn to the Lord and you say, Lord, I just can't take it anymore. I'm tired of struggling. I'm tired of patience. Lord, I'm tired of waiting for an answer from you that's not coming. Lord, I prayed for a spouse, or I prayed for a job, or I prayed for healing, or I prayed for direction in my life. Nothing. All I hear is zero from you. Lord, I'm tired of it all. So you go to Hebrews chapter 11 and you go to verse 7. By faith, Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen, in reverence, prepared an ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. Do you know how long it took Noah to build the boat? I mean, God says that, they'd never seen a boat. They go, hey, Noah, I want you to build an ark, a boat. Why? We're in the desert, God. I mean, does this make any sense? Between 75 and 120 years, they estimate the length of time it took to build that boat. Can you imagine? So when you're impatient, listen to Noah whispering in your ear. Listen, how long have you been waiting for that answer? Year, 2 years, 3 months? 6 months, 6 years? I waited 75 years or maybe up to 120 years to build the boat. And by the way, people ridiculed him, probably saying, Noah, you are sure that this was from God that told you to build this ship? Yeah, right. Yeah, right. I tried to warn them of the coming judgment, but they wouldn't listen. So I kept building by faith. Then one day, the waters came, the ark became the vehicle of salvation as the world was destroyed. And Noah is saying to you, hey, persevere like I did by faith. I trusted the Lord. Suppose you're in a situation where you just have to sacrifice a whole lot for the Lord. You know, we live in a really nice place here, and we're very safe, it seems, right now, and there's no persecution, but you've probably heard and read stories of different countries where it's brutal. I mean, there are people dying every day because they are Christians. In some countries are very, very, very cruel. And, but perhaps in your life you're sacrificing and you're tired of it. And you go to the Lord and say, Lord, look at the sacrifice you're asking of me. It's too much. I can't take it. What does it cost you to follow the Lord? Reputation? Laughter? Mockery? What is it costing you to be a Christian? Maybe it is costing you. I don't know. Maybe your family has ostracized you. It's very possible. I know people whose families have ostracized them for being believers. Well, maybe that's when you go to verse 8 and 9. By faith, Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place which he was to receive for an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. And by faith, he lived as an alien in the land of promise, and as a foreign land, dwelling in tents, and Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the same promise. God said to Abraham, go to a country that's not yours. And that was a huge sacrifice. He left his own country. Not easy. And then later on, verse 17, by faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. You remember? God promised him the son of inheritance, and he finally had Isaac. This is it. This is the son he was waiting for. And then God says, go kill him. He offered up Isaac. He who had received the promise was offering up his only begotten son. It was he to whom it was said, in Isaac your descendants shall be called. But of course, you know the story, and God stopped him from killing his son and provided an animal. But the point is, he was ready to sacrifice. So if you have to sacrifice, you go back to Abraham and these other people and go, wait a minute, they sacrificed huge amounts. Maybe I can too. Or maybe you're suffering injustice. Maybe as a Christian, you have to maybe make a decision at work or something, and people are now upset with you because, you know, you are standing out as this person who will not go with the crowd, and you are suffering what you feel is unjustly because you are trying to do what's right, and you refuse to go with the crowd. And you're going, Lord, this is tough. I'm a Christian. Aren't you supposed to be blessing me? And here I am. I'm the one being persecuted, ostracized, because I'm trying to do what's right. Oh, and then you go to verse 22. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the exodus of the sons of Israel and gave orders concerning his bones. Of course, that's talking about his death, but when you think of Joseph, what do you think of? When you think of the life of Joseph, the story of Joseph, it comes up to the reader, a life of injustice. He is the epitome of the man who suffered injustice, sold into slavery by his brothers, unjustly accused of rape in Egypt, and finds himself in prison. Then he helps a man to be released from prison and asks him to do something that can get him out. But the man forgets Joseph, and he stays there for years. Joseph was as low as a person can be. Total injustice in his life. For years, waiting and waiting and waiting. But he stayed faithful to the Lord. And then one day everything changed. Overnight he found himself prime minister of Egypt. He remained faithful to God, and in his case, God raised him up. It's not always the case, but in his case, he did. So Joseph is saying to you, if you are suffering injustice, hey, it is possible to be faithful to God when everything doesn't go your way. It's easier when everything goes well, but when things don't go your way, it is much more difficult to be faithful to God. And he says, remain faithful to the Lord. And there's so many examples in here. I always really didn't like verses 36, chapter 11, and others experienced mockings and scourgings and chains and imprisonment. Some were stoned, some were sawn in two. They were tempted, they were put to death by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated, etc. Folks, a lot of people before us, a lot of believers and Christians had it really, really tough. We should be inspired by them. So, how do we run the race to win? Number one, imitate past witnesses. Imitate these men and these women. Number two, reject the superfluous. Reject the superfluous. Verse 1, therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also, look at this, lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let's run the race. So he says, reject the superfluous, every encumbrance. I've got a Christian friend in America. He loves the Lord, and he loves to give money to missions. And he's thinking in his mind, how can I make a lot of money easy to give to missions? You know what he thought about? He thought about the fact that Americans collect a lot of stuff. In fact, many Americans have so many things that they have to rent storage unit to put the stuff there because their houses aren't big enough to hold it all. He thought, this is a great way to make money. You buy these storage units, people put their stuff in there, all you do is just give them a key and you bring in the money. So you just like making all this money, just give keys out, take keys in. This guy made a fortune on these storage units, and he gave it all to missions. And I thought to myself, you know, a lot of people have just too much stuff. It's what we call superfluous. You know, this is the problem with wealthy nations. We can just buy so much stuff, we don't know what to do with it. Well, the author of the book of Hebrews warns us that that kind of superfluous stuff, and I'm not just talking about goods, a lot of things can slow us down significantly in the Christian race. He's describing a race here. He's actually, in real life, you're talking about a runner, like in the Greek Olympics if you want. And when you see a runner, like at the Olympics, for example, he's going to do the 100-meter sprint. Have you ever seen one of those runners show up in ski boots? Never. That would be stupid, right? They are trying to take as little with them, the most comfortable and little amounts of things, so they can actually run as fast as they can. Originally, these athletes competed naked. Today is just minimum clothing possible to be able to go as fast as possible. The word exercise in Greek, gymnas, gymnasium, from the root word gymnon, which means naked. So this is the way it was. That's what Hebrews 12:1 is telling us. So what kind of clutter should we get rid of? The text doesn't actually tell us. Now, it's really important what I'm going to say here. He's not talking about sin. That's the next word. He's saying, look, let us also lay aside every encumbrance, quote, or comma, and the sin which so easily entangles us. So encumbrance here is not sin. That's the next thing. So he's talking about anything that isn't necessarily bad in itself, but can slow us down in the race. Second Timothy 2:4 says, there is no soldier who embarrasses himself with the affairs of life if he wants to please the one who enlists him. Can you imagine if you're a soldier in a war? I mean, you're on the battlefield, okay? And there's a war going on and bullets flying all around and you're there with your gun and suddenly you say, no, I'm going to stop. You take out your phone and you start playing a video game. You're playing a video, you're playing a video game while the battle's raging. What would you think? Hey, hello? I mean, that's not safe. You're supposed to be protecting your fellow soldier. That would make no sense to play a video game in the middle of a battle. Well, that's what he's saying here. A soldier doesn't embarrass himself with the affairs of life. So there's nothing wrong with a video game unless it slows you down. And for a soldier, that'd be really bad to play a video game during a battle. So, what is he talking about? Like a hobby. Hobby that maybe sucks up our time and energy of our life so that our life with the Lord just gets less zealous. I was thinking social media. I think there's a huge addiction, and I'm probably guilty of this too. It's so easy. You just go to Facebook or Instagram or whatever and just scroll, and we can spend so much time just nonsensically scrolling for no reason whatsoever. I'm not saying scrolling's bad. Sometimes it's kind of fun to scroll, but it can become addictive and just sap our spiritual energy away. It really can. Sports can be the same. We had our son James. He was a basketball player, and all of his games were on Sunday. That became a real problem. James even didn't want to do that, and we didn't know what to do. And finally, he said, no, I'm not going to do Sundays. And the Lord really blessed. He was able to have games on Saturday, but that became a real tension for him. And he ended up, Lord blessed him. He got a scholarship and did really well in basketball later on. I think their relationships with some people can be really problematic also. We're supposed to spend time with people, right? That's exactly what we're supposed to do, and try and preach the gospel to them. But listen to this. 1 Corinthians 15:33 says what? He says, do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. Bad company can eventually have a very bad effect on you. If you stick around people that are negative and anti-God, they can begin to influence you. So we're supposed to be with unbelievers, but if those unbelievers start messing with you, you need to pull away. That's what Psalm 1 says, right? How blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the path of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. Second homes can be a trap. My parents-in-law, they lived in Seattle where everyone had a boat. Well, boats are great. Yachts are fantastic. I love yachts. But when do you use your yacht? Usually on the weekend. And on the weekend, it gets a real problem because you're always away from church. So it becomes a tension. So all I'm saying is there's a lot of different things like that are not bad in and of themselves, but they can sap your energy from the Lord. So how do we run the race to win? Number 1, imitate past witnesses. Number 2, reject the superfluous. Number 3, cast off sin. Cast off sin. Verse 1. Let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us. So now this is like sin. It's the general word for sin, which is evil, that which offends God. He says if there's sin in your life, reject it, because it's going to slow you down. It's going to slow you down. What kind of sin? Any kind of sin. Let me give you just a couple of examples. First, this is a really famous one, 1 Kings 11. Solomon had a real problem. He had a huge weakness in his life. You know what it was? Women. Women and sex. And in 1 Kings 11, now King Solomon loved many foreign women. A lot of these were political marriages, we understand that. But he loved them. Foreign women, along with the daughters of the Pharaoh, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittite women, from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the sons of Israel, you shall not associate with them, neither shall they associate with you, for they will surely turn your heart away from their gods. Well, Solomon held fast to these in love. So God had warned him, watch out. If you marry someone that doesn't know the Lord, they're going to take your heart away from the Lord. Solomon says, you don't know what you're talking about. Verse 3. He had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. I don't know if you did the math. 700 plus 300, 1,000 wives and concubines. And verse 3 then says, and his wives turned his heart away. That's a very blatant kind of sin in his case that completely turned his heart away. Now, I think he repented at the end of his life, and he wrote the Song of Solomon to show us, hey, wait a minute. He learned his lesson. You know what? It's not 1,000. It's one. One woman, one man, one marriage, period, for life. Here's another example of someone who sinned by walking away from the Lord. It's Demas in 2 Timothy 4:10. It's interesting. What does he say here? 2 Timothy 4:10, Demas, having loved this present world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica. It looks like he was just taken up by the love of money, the love of the world, the love of the stuff, and his God became the world. And it's hard, especially in a very wealthy country where everyone has so much, to really say, you know what, Lord, you are first. Salary, stuff, houses, all that second. We're not saying those are bad necessarily, but they can become bad if they slow us down in the race. Jonah's had a problem. Prophet Jonah, hate and racism. There's a lot of things, a lot of sins that can really slow us down. And you know what we're supposed to do about that? This is interesting. When there's a sin in your life that you're aware of, maybe it's a secret sin, and you know that it's messing with your life and your Christian life, what are you supposed to do? Listen to this. Matthew 18:7. Woe to the world because of its stumbling blocks. It is inevitable that stumbling blocks come, but woe to that man through whom the stumbling block comes. If your hand or your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off. Throw it out from you. It is better for you to enter life crippled or lame than having 2 hands and 2 feet and be cast into eternal fire. You know what he's saying? Be radical. Don't play with sin. When you're aware that there's a sin in your life and it's messing with your life and it's slowing you down, he says, just get radical. Get radical. And that's exactly what Hebrews is saying here, right? Let us also lay aside the sin which so easily entangles us. Number 4, we're almost done. Number 4, how to run to win. Imitate past witnesses, reject the superfluous, cast off sin. Number 4, look to Jesus. Oh, I love this, verse 2. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. It's interesting. Even in Hebrews 11, all these people that had to sacrifice so much, like for example, in chapter 11, verse 10, with Abraham, he was looking for the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. It's interesting. He was looking to heaven. That's what allowed him to persevere. Moses looked for a reward. 11, 26, and 27. They all did. Well, we are to fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. That's how we get through it. When things are tough, when things are hard, we look to Jesus. He is a preeminent example of someone who must live by faith. It's interesting. Jesus struggled. Did you know that? You remember this in the Garden of Gethsemane in Matthew 26? He's about to go to the cross, but he prays 3 times, Lord, could you allow this cup to pass from me? But then he says, not my will, but your will. So he was looking to the Father. He was praying to the Father for the joy set before him. He knew what was coming. He was going to go back and have that relationship with the Father that he had before he came to earth. That's why he endured the cross. That's why he despised shame, because he is going to sit down at the right hand of the throne of God. You see, Jesus agreed to go to the cross, that huge trial. Why? Because he had his eyes fixed on the Father. Well, he's saying we can go through those trials. Why? Because our eyes are fixed on Jesus. That's what verse 2 is saying. It's very simple. So the day you start moving your eyes away from Jesus are the days that you're going to start really struggling. Very, very interesting verses. We should be experts on the life of Jesus. And that leads to the final point. How do you run the race to win? Imitate past witnesses, reject the superfluous, cast off sin, look to Jesus, and finally, don't grow weary. Don't grow weary. Verse 3 and 4, for consider him. Well, actually, in verse 2, we could say, he ran with endurance. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. And then for consider in verse 3, who endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you may not grow weary and lose heart. He says, look, Jesus didn't give up. Jesus didn't grow weary. He was asking God for help, but he kept going until the end. So we should endure the same as he did. And then he says in verse 4, you have not resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin. I was talking to a trek runner recently. They run these like 100-kilometer races or whatever. And he said the only way to run a very hard marathon is just to find your pace and keep going. And he said when your body begins to scream to you to stop, that's when you have to decide in your mind to keep going. Just keep going. Set your eyes upon the prize. Here, set your eyes upon the Lord. Just keep going. Just keep going. It's interesting, the word race in verse 1, let us run the race with endurance. Very interesting. The word in Greek comes from agon, from which we get the word agony. A race is agonizing. So, that's it. As we approach the new year of this year, we almost need to make a decision today. We almost need to say, okay, Lord, I don't know what it's going to be like next year. This could be good or it could be bad. It's probably both. Usually there's joys and trials in a year, right? Lord, I'm making a decision today. I'm going to run that race to win. I'm not going to give up. How? First of all, I'm going to imitate past witnesses. Maybe you need to read some biographies, or maybe read Hebrews 11. Number 2, I'm going to reject the superfluous. What in my life is good, but it's causing me to slow down? Maybe I need to rethink that. Number 3, cast off sin. Is there a sin in my life that I just need to deal with? Number 4, Lord, help me look to Jesus more. Maybe you just need to start reading your Bible every day. Maybe that's your commitment. This year I'm going to read my Bible this year. Every day I'm going to read my Bible so I can keep my eyes on Jesus. And finally, I'm going to decide not to grow weary. I'll never forget what happened to that hockey player. His teeth were flattened in his mouth. Ouch. No problem. Go back in the game. Okay, so I'm praying that that's the way I will react this year if something really tough happens. Dentist, deal with my mouth. I'm going back. Is that going to be all of our decision? I pray so. Lord, thank you so much for these amazing verses. And we thank you for 2025, Lord. Bless it, I pray, and help us make the right decisions now. In Jesus' name, amen.